All right, ready for a deep dive today. You guys sent in some excerpts from Fyodor Dostoevsky's The House of the Dead. This was going to be a real eye-opener. We're going to explore what it was actually like, get this to be imprisoned in Siberia back in the 19th century.
Oh, yeah, a pretty bleak picture, for sure.
No kidding. But, Dostoevsky actually spent 4 years in a Siberian prison, so this novel is based on, like, his own firsthand experiences.
Wow, 4 years. That's a long time. And, what's really interesting is that the book goes way beyond just the physical hardships. Dostoevsky really gets into the heads of the prisoners. He shows us how they form like these intricate social structures, the unexpected kindness they show each other, and the ways they find to cope in such a brutal environment.
So it's not just about the punishment then, right? It's about how these people built an entire society within the prison walls.
Exactly. They had their own hierarchies, their own rules, and it's kind of crazy how those hierarchies often mirrored the social norms of 19th century Russia. For example, prisoners from noble families, especially if they were Russian, they held a higher status than others.
It's like even in prison, your social standing from the outside world followed you.
It did. And on the flip side, you had Polish prisoners, particularly those imprisoned for political reasons, who were often at the very bottom.
Why is that?
Well, to understand that, you got to think about the historical context. Poland and Russia, they had this long and messy relationship full of conflict and, oppression. So these Polish political prisoners were seen as a threat to the Russian Empire. And that meant they faced even harsher treatment within the prison system.
It makes you realize that even in this isolated world of prison, the politics and history from the outside world still had a huge impact.
Absolutely. And it's not always about just nationality either. Dostoevsky tells the story about a prisoner named Akimich. He was like the skilled craftsman, really respected within the prison. But get this, he had actually attacked a superior officer.
That's wild. You'd think assaulting an officer would put you at the bottom of the pecking order.
You would think, but Akimich's expertise made him super valuable, and his personality, let's just say, earned him a certain level of respect. But here's what's really interesting, though. Dostoevsky points out how the other prisoners, even though they respected Akimich, they actually disliked any sort of familiarity from anyone who was in a higher position than them. They preferred to maintain a respectful distance.
That's kind of strange, isn't it? You'd think in their situation they'd crave kindness from, well, anyone. Why do you think they felt that way?
It really boils down to the rigidity of social norms back then. Even in this brutal environment, there were these unwritten rules about how people of different social standings should interact. It seems counterintuitive, but maybe maintaining those boundaries gave them a sense of order, some predictability in a world that was otherwise completely chaotic and unpredictable.
It's almost like those social rules were their way of holding on to some semblance of normalcy.
Exactly. And speaking of normalcy, it makes you wonder, how did these guys actually cope with such a harsh existence? I mean, how did they survive mentally and emotionally?
It had to be a constant struggle. But Dostoevsky does mention these, what he calls private occupations the prisoners would find. Things like tailoring, shoemaking, even like a whole bartering system going on within the prison.
Those activities were vital to their survival. I mean, think about it. They provided a distraction from the monotony, a sense of purpose, and for some guys, even a way to make a little money or trade for goods they needed. It's incredible. They basically created their own mini economy within those prison walls.
When you mentioned bartering, it reminded me of that story about the prisoner who kept smuggling vodka into the prison. He'd get flogged for it every time, but he just kept doing it.
Oh, man. That story really says a lot. It shows the entrepreneurial spirit of some of the prisoners, but also their absolute desperate need for an escape, even if it was just a temporary escape through alcohol.
Yeah, but you'd think the constant punishment would deter him at some point. I mean, why do you think he was so persistent?
I think it goes to show how important that vodka was, not just to him, but probably to many of the prisoners. It wasn't just about the alcohol. It was about that feeling of escape, a break from the mental and emotional torment of their situation. The physical pain of the flogging was almost worth it for that brief respite.
It makes you really consider the psychological impact of being imprisoned. It's not just about the physical confinement. It's about that mental and emotional toll, that crushing weight of hopelessness.
Right. And yet, Dostoevsky also shows us these glimmers of humanity amidst all that brutality, those moments of compassion that just shine through the darkness. Like that scene where the young boy and his mother give alms to the prisoners,
Yes. They were obviously poor themselves, but they still had that compassion towards these convicted men. It's such a beautiful moment, a reminder that even in the bleakest of places, human kindness can exist.
It really highlights the prisoners' deep yearning for a connection to the outside world, the world they were completely cut off from. That simple act of charity must have meant the world to them.
It's so powerful. It's like a reminder that even in these desolate places, there's potential for human connection, for compassion. And it wasn't just from outsiders, right? Think about that episode where a prisoner gives his new summer trousers to that Jewish prisoner who was being ridiculed.
Wow, yeah, what a striking act of kindness, especially considering it happened within the prisoner community where life was often so brutal and self-serving.
It's like he was saying, hey, we're all in this together, even though they were technically all criminals.
Exactly. That one small gesture says so much about the potential for empathy and solidarity, even in a system designed to dehumanize. But it does make you question whether those acts of kindness were enough to counter the psychological damage of being locked up for so long.
That's a good question. Dostoevsky mentions how the prisoners would often avoid expressing any hope for the future, for fear of being mocked.
Yeah, they were trying to protect themselves from getting hurt, from the disappointment of hoping for something that might never happen. There's this quote, it really sticks with me, where a prisoner says, "They would be glad to pick a quarrel with you in order to humiliate you. It is martyrdom for men like us to be here." Man, that's heavy.
It really captures that feeling of despair, that sense of powerlessness. It makes you think that they sometimes turned on each other as a way to cope with their suffering.
Exactly. It's tragic, but honestly kind of understandable given their circumstances. But speaking of hope, there was this one moment where things seemed like they might actually change.
Are you talking about the inspector's visit?
Yeah. The anticipation surrounding that visit was intense. It totally disrupted the prison routine. You had the prisoners hoping for better treatment, and then the prison officials just filled with anxiety, even fear.
It's as if that visit exposed the power dynamics of the whole prison system. It was like this crack in their facade of control. But did things actually get better after the inspector left? Dostoevsky leaves us hanging there, doesn't he?
He does, and I think it's intentional. It makes us think about that back and forth between hope and despair in these confined environments. It raises the question of whether true change is even possible within a system that's inherently oppressive.
So what stood out to you the most about life inside a Siberian prison?
For me, it was how the prisoners viewed the doctors. They saw them as this rare source of compassion and respect.
Oh, yeah, you're right, they did. And it wasn't just about the medical care either. It was about having that human connection, that moment of genuine interaction that they were all so starved for.
Exactly. The doctors represented a flicker of humanity in a system that was so often dehumanizing.
And their positive view of the doctors really contrasts with their general mistrust of most authority figures.
Definitely. And that mistrust, it wasn't just about being in prison. It reflects the broader social and political climate of Russia back then, where so many people, particularly those from the lower classes, were incredibly skeptical of anyone in a position of power.
It's like the prison was a microcosm of the larger societal tensions of the time.
Exactly. And within this web of relationships and power struggles, Dostoevsky brings us these vivid characters, each with their own unique story, their own ways of coping.
Like Ali, the young Circassian prisoner. He seems so out of place in that brutal setting.
His story is fascinating, right? He represents a certain innocence, it's a stark contrast to the hardened criminals around him. But even he finds these moments of connection, of personal growth, particularly through his relationship with the narrator.
Yeah, their bond really shows that friendship and mentorship can blossom in the most unexpected places. And then there's Gazin, this imposing figure known for his strength and violent outbursts.
Oh, Gazin. He's a much darker character, for sure. He represents the potential for violence and cruelty that can fester in an environment like that, almost like a cautionary tale.
His character raises these tough questions about the nature of punishment versus rehabilitation. Did the prison system make some of these men worse?
That's a question Dostoevsky wrestles with throughout the book. He doesn't give us easy answers, but he forces us to confront the realities of the penal system and its effects on both the individuals and society as a whole.
Wow, this has been a lot to take in, and we've barely scratched the surface of the House of the Dead. What resonated with you the most from these excerpts?
I was really struck by how Dostoevsky portrays the prisoners' relationships with animals, like that story of Vaska the goat, who became like a beloved pet for everyone.
Vaska. He was more than just a pet, though, wasn't he? almost like this symbol of innocence, a connection to the natural world.
Exactly. And then there's Bull and Kultiapka, the two dogs that become unlikely friends within the prison. It's amazing.
It's true. Those stories about the animals really highlight the prisoner's capacity for empathy, for compassion, even after the things they've done.
Yeah, they remind us that even the hardest criminals, there's still some humanity there. It makes you wonder about how that environment affects their ability to connect, not just with animals, but with each other, too.
Before we go any further, I wanted to touch on that scene where a prisoner gets released.
Oh, yeah, right. That scene perfectly captured all the emotions that come with liberation. The relief, the apprehension, the weight of the past, and the uncertainty of the future all mixed together.
It really raises questions about what freedom actually means. Can someone ever truly be free after being confined for so long?
That's a deep question, and it's one that goes way beyond the physical prison walls. It speaks to the challenges of reintegrating back into society, of carrying the burden of your past and finding your place in the world after such a life-altering experience.
That's a lot to unpack. But we've really just started exploring the depths of Dostoevsky's insights. There's still so much more to discuss.
Absolutely. We've only touched on a tiny part of the stories, the characters, the philosophical questions he brings up. I think it's time to move on and dig into some other really interesting aspects of this incredible work. As we keep going with this, one thing that really sticks out is how Dostoevsky uses these ordinary moments from prison life to show us what's happening in the prisoners' minds. Remember he talks about their obsession with gambling?
Oh yeah, that was wild. They'd bet on anything, wouldn't they? Even when they barely had anything to their names.
It's so interesting. It's like they needed that risk, that thrill, of winning to break up the boredom. It was a way to feel some kind of control, even if it wasn't real, in a place where they had so little agency.
Yeah, it's true. Even when the odds were stacked against them, they'd still gamble. What do you think that says about how they were feeling?
I think it shows just how desperate they were, how much they craved something, anything, to disrupt the hopelessness of their situation. They were hoping for that one lucky break, the one that might change everything.
It also makes you think about how important money was, or the lack of it, I guess, within the prison. Even a small amount could make a huge difference in their lives.
Totally. Money, or even something basic like extra breadcrumbs, could be used for favors, for a bit of comfort, for some tobacco. It's fascinating how they created this whole little economy within the prison.
It's like a messed up version of the outside world where money controls so much. But inside those walls, those basic necessities, even something like tobacco, they become even more valuable. Right?
Absolutely. And it's not just about stuff either. Dostoevsky shows how the prisoners find other ways to express themselves, to create some sense of meaning in their situation. Their plays, remember that?
Oh yeah, the theater productions. They were so passionate about those performances, spending hours rehearsing, creating elaborate costumes, sets, the whole 9 yards.
It was way more than just a way to pass the time, though. It was an outlet for their creativity, a chance to express themselves, show off their talents.
It was like they were saying, hey, we're not just convicts. We have dreams, we have skills, we have stories to tell.
Right, and they really wanted an audience, not just their fellow inmates, but the guards, even the townspeople. They were seeking validation, like they wanted to be seen as something more than just their crimes.
It's really moving to see that need for connection, that desire to be creative, even in that environment.
It really shows the resilience of the human spirit, the need to express ourselves and connect with others no matter what.
Dostoevsky doesn't hold back when describing the harsh realities of prison life. But he also shows these moments of grace, those sparks of humanity that shine through.
He's reminding us that even in a system built on punishment and control, people can still connect. But he's also critiquing that system, isn't he? He's showing us, through what these men went through, how dehumanizing it is, the constant watching, the deprivation, the mental toll it takes.
Yeah, for sure. And he subtly exposes the hypocrisy and corruption that can happen within these institutions, too. Like that character, the major, who was supposed to keep order. He was always drunk and abusive.
The major is like the perfect example of how power corrupts, even in a place that's supposed to be about the law.
Yeah, his character shows the huge gap between the idea of justice and how brutal it can be in reality.
And it's not just him. Dostoevsky hints at the corruption within the prison itself, like how guards could be bribed. It created this whole other system of inequality inside the prison.
So the power dynamics, the corruption, the hierarchies, it all just gets replicated within those walls. But even amidst all that darkness, There were moments where the prisoners found ways to take back some control over their lives.
Oh, absolutely. Like that story about Mikhailov, the prisoner who outsmarted the system to get his punishment switched with another guy's. He used his smarts and his knowledge of the rules to make his situation a little better.
It shows how resourceful they could be, how they adapted to survive in a system designed to keep them down. And then there was that time they all stood up to the authorities about the terrible food.
Man, that was a powerful moment. They risked punishment just to demand better treatment.
It showed that they still had some dignity and that they were willing to fight for basic rights.
But it does make you wonder if their protest made any real difference. Like Dostoevsky often does. He leaves us with that question.
His ambiguity really makes you think, doesn't it? It makes you consider all the complexities of power, resistance, and change within a system like that.
It does, and it reminds us that even when things seem hopeless, the human spirit can still resist, can fight for justice, and hold on to hope.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about the prisoners' dreams of freedom.
Ah, yes. Those dreams, the other inmates would often mock them for it. It was like hoping was dangerous.
What do you think that was?
I think it was their way of coping. In that awful environment, hope could actually hurt more than it helped. By pushing down their dreams, they were protecting themselves from that crushing disappointment, the reality that freedom might never come.
It's such a sad irony, isn't it? The very thing that could help them, give them strength, was seen as a threat.
It shows the impact of their confinement on their minds. But even though they tried to bury those dreams, the yearning for freedom still came through, right? In their conversations, songs, even those plays we talked about.
It's like the human spirit can't help but want more, even when trapped in the worst possible situation. I feel like we've only touched the surface of these excerpts, though. There's just so much to The House of the Dead.
Absolutely. We've barely covered a fraction of the stories, the characters, the philosophical questions he asks. And I think it's time we explored some other fascinating aspects of this amazing book. As we really dig into these excerpts, it's incredible how, despite everything, the prisoners manage to find ways to make their lives meaningful. They actually build a life, in a way, within this horrible environment.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. It's almost like they're clinging to pieces of their old lives, even though everything's changed.
Right. And sometimes it's the smallest things that give them a spark of joy, something that connects them to the outside world. Do you remember that passage where Dostoevsky talks about how excited the prisoners got over a delivery of fresh cucumbers?
Oh, yeah. It's crazy to think that cucumbers could bring so much happiness. But I guess when you're deprived of simple pleasures, those little things become really important.
It says a lot about their desire for, sensory experiences, the taste of real food, anything that reminds them of a life beyond those walls. In that kind of deprivation, even the tiniest pleasures are huge.
And it's not just about physical comforts either. Dostoevsky mentions how they'd gather to share stories in the evenings. Tales about their past, their adventures, their loves, all of it.
Those storytelling sessions were so much more than just entertainment. It was how they connected with each other, how they held on to their individuality. They were reminding themselves and each other that they were more than just their crimes.
Yeah, it was like taking back a bit of control, wasn't it? They couldn't control their surroundings, but they could control the stories they told, the memories they kept.
Exactly. And a lot of times, those stories showed how much they missed their old world. The world of freedom and love, of possibilities. Like that one story about the prisoner who talks about his passionate love affair with Louisa.
Oh, I remember that one. That story was so full of life, such a contrast to the reality of prison. It was like by sharing that memory, he could escape for a little while and reconnect with a part of himself that was buried.
Right. And it wasn't just about escaping the present. It was about holding on to hope for the future. Even when everything seemed hopeless, they still clung to the idea of redemption, of a life after prison.
It's pretty amazing how resilient the human spirit can be. It shows that no matter how bad things get, we can still hope, we can still dream, we can still believe that things can get better.
And that's what makes Dostoevsky such a powerful writer. He doesn't sugarcoat the dark side of human nature, but he also has this belief in our ability to change, to grow, to find redemption.
He reminds us that even people who've done terrible things are still human. They're capable of love, compassion, and regret. It's a tough thing to think about, but it's so important.
It really is. And it's a theme that runs through all of The House of the Dead. It's a book that makes us confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world. It makes us question our ideas about justice and punishment. And in the end, it shows us the incredible strength of the human spirit.
So to our listeners, we really encourage you to keep exploring The House of the Dead. Dive deeper into Dostoevsky's world with all its complexities and contradictions. Let his insights challenge you, and let the prisoner's stories move you.
And as you read, think about this. What can we learn from people who've been rejected by society, who've seen the worst of humanity? What can their experiences teach us about freedom, about hope, about the strength we all have inside us?
We truly believe that reading Dostoevsky's work is a journey worth taking. It's a journey that can change our perspective, deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world, and leave us with a deep appreciation for how complex and amazing the human experience can be.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Fyodor Dostoevsky's The House of the Dead. We hope this has been insightful and made you think. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.